Okay, yeah, that's better. Yay, I hope you're still here. Everybody who was here for Writing Wednesday, they were unable to hear me, so I've started again, and I hope you can find me, and I hope it's working. This is Janet Fitch, Writing Wednesday, and um, I'm I'd been people couldn't hear me. So that was a first. Always a surprise. There's always a surprise with tech. And so the surprise today was that I couldn't be heard. So thank you very much for returning for Writing Wednesday. And I do have a question today from Christina Nicole, who is here today, CC Sullivan. Um, and she asks, what are my thoughts about Substack? I write a weekly story, All the King's Men, by CC Sullivan, but can't decide if it's worth it. How did you carve a space out for yourself to be so well received when you started publishing without giving yourself away for free on a platform? And how did you juggle novel writing with other writing, if you ever did? Also, I'm in the midst of my first novel and I'm unsure what to focus on. Okay, so what I wanted to do was talk about these platforms, Substack, Medium, all the different outside writing that people are encouraged to do, invited to do, tempted to do, um, freelance work when you're writing fiction. Um, it's an interesting thing to both um, try to write nonfiction, and usually Substacks are essays, to write essays and write your fiction. Um, People are encouraged to Substack. Substack is very user friendly, and they encourage you um, to have paid subscriptions. And writers think, oh, if I get paid subscriptions, then I have an income stream, and that'll um, help fund my fiction. And there are fewer and fewer places to place your um, freelance work. Freelance articles used to be a mainstay, and there's still some places that you can get published freelance and get paid for it. I know that in Southern California we have our Auto Club, and I'm sure there's Auto Club all over the country. Those magazines still pay. One of the best paying markets for freelance work is AARP. It has like the largest subscription of anything in the country. Um, Newspapers, there are sources. Substack is tricky because probably more so than, say, HuffPo or something like that, which generally I don't think HuffPo pays. Um, the thing about having a weekly Substack, if you are CC is writing a weekly Substack, but can't decide if it's worth it. How did you carve a space out for myself to be so well received when you started publishing without giving yourself away for free on a platform? Well, when I started, the world was very different. Um, you didn't give your work away for free ever, ever, you know, ever. Um, Now there's this thing about um, platform and exposure. You're doing it for exposure. Um, if you're a fiction writer, first of all, doing a nonfiction Substack, writing essays, Hi, it's Sparkly. Sparkly. I don't know who that is, but hi. I'm glad you found me, and hi, Amy. I'm glad you came back. Um, the getting a following for essays does not necessarily result in more exposure for yourself as a fiction writer. If you want exposure for yourself as a fiction writer, you're better off in the journals, writing fiction. So, keeping a Substack, I think of the people whose Substack I actually read. I have people who, like 3 that I actually pay for, and then a couple of friends because I can keep up with them because they're writing about their lives and what they're doing. Very interesting to me because I know them. And maybe if I didn't know them and was interested in their topic, there's one couple who are living in France and are writing irregularly. They each contribute to their Substack. There's a writer who's living in France who writes about her experience. Um, but she's a nonfiction writer. So in writing these essays about her life it's Karen Carbo, writing her essays about her life in a town called Collioure, which is on the Mediterranean, close to the Spanish border. Um, that's going to feed her work because she's a nonfiction writer. As far as fiction writers, I follow Garth Greenwell, whose book Cleanness is out. And he is a teacher and he's a master teacher. And he's just an absolutely brilliant guy. And his Substack is about literary things and he writes essays. I mean, they're polished, long, beautiful, polished essays that could easily be in the, New York Review of Books, but instead that's his Substack and it's a paid thing. And um, he just has a lot of excess computational power. He has a lot of things he wants to say and deal with that are well worth the money. And so I actually pay this, but he doesn't do a weekly. He teaches as well, but he doesn't do a weekly Substack. He does a month, maybe monthly Substack. He gets like one essay a month, and that's what you get. So what we're always talking about fiction is uh, with is like how much time and attention do you have? Laura follows George Saunders, who has great writing advice. Saunders is a wonderful novelist and short story writer, and what he uses his Substack for is to analyze mostly short stories. But I think he has a book club now, and you can read with him. But he'll analyze a story on his paid Substack. Um, and so people like that. Garth is amazing. Amy says, I met Garth at Bread Loaf. That's cool. Um, I I feel like I'm a one thing at a time person. And long ago, I read an article that I might be able to find somewhere. I think it was published in the New Yorker years ago. And it was a fairly famous novelist who wrote a piece of how it was called How to Become a Minor Writer. And I still remember that. How to become, I'm going to look it up and see if I can find it. How to become a minor writer. And I think it was in the New Yorker years ago. Um, uh, let's see if I can find it. Um, no, I can't find it offhand. I think it was in the New Yorker. Um, and they said how to become a minor writer is write book reviews, write little short essays, write all this little stuff in because we're so tempted to get our names in print. It is it's such a yearning, especially if you're a novelist, and it might be 3, 4, 5 years between books, even if once you're going, it might be 10 or 15 before you get your first publication, and you just yearn to see your name in print. You get so tired of year after year in obscurity, turning out your work, and so I get it, I get it. There's a yearning for publication. Um, but for me, I am a one thing at a time person. Brenda says, "Oh, she loves George Saunders' Substack and Rebecca Mackay's Mac with 2 Ks for Mackay." Um, the thing about writing a Substack, it's like, when you read everybody's Substacks and then you don't have time to read a novel, you don't have time to read books, better to read books. Longer is better. Um, is that it takes away from not only time away from your central project, but it takes the juice away. It takes some of the cream, off the top of the bottle, for those who remember unpasteurized or unhomogenized milk. Um, Mine comes that way, it gets big lumps at the top. Um, but I have to be careful because I'm not a really high energy person. And if I give the my creative juice to an essay, that's the day's output. And if it takes 3 days to craft a beautiful essay, like what Garth Greenwell would put in his Substack, um, that's days that I'm not writing my fiction. I have a very hard time switching gears. I'm the most one single track mind person you can possibly imagine. Um, so I find it very difficult to divide my writing life into smaller projects. And I remember seeing that article years and years ago, how to become a minor writer. Um, and it's basically saying if you want to not create the important work that you have in mind, and I was very ambitious of where I wanted to be in the literary world. Um, take on a lot of side projects is a really good way to derail yourself. Okay, so that's one end of the spectrum. Some people are the other way. They like being able to devote part of the workday to, say, a long project, the novel or whatever they're working on. And then they really like being able to switch off between projects. My husband's that way. He likes to have a play going, poetry going, short stories, and he likes to move from one thing to another. And that rhythm is very helpful for him. So, in fact, he would probably be better at having a Substack or some sort of platform than I would. Because for me, I'm such a am such a novelist that I give absolute 100% attention to one thing, and that's what I do. So what did I do when I was younger and supporting myself? Um, I freelanced and I was writing short stories. And there were times when I was working like on for a magazine or a newspaper, um, where I just didn't when I was the editor of a newspaper, I didn't write short stories at all, no short fiction. Um, as a novelist, I've had jobs, I supported myself. I'm doing this at AWP if anybody is going to be at AWP. I'm on a panel that a writer, Lorinda Toledo, gathered together, and they're mostly younger people. So I'm like the eminence grise, um, the gray-haired specialist. So I don't have gray yet, but you know, the how do you make a living? But this is, I always like to do jobs that don't require the same juice that writing fiction does. So even writing jobs, I do better at, frankly, like factory work, or I was a typesetter for many years, something with no public contact, and it didn't use, I wasn't writing, it didn't use the same energy. To write for free and spend that kind of energy writing into the void. I don't know if I would, I wouldn't do it. I don't think. Disgruntled. I guess I used to have what did they call it, WordPress? I blogged for a little while, but mostly I put shorts up. I used my fiction, and I wrote shorts to a prompt. You guys know that exercise I'm very fond of, called the word, picking a word and writing 2 pages, 2 pages, double space, using the word somewhere in there. And I would post those. So it fed my writing to have that WordPress. I guess if I sat and just ranted or something, I could do a Substack. But would it wouldn't be like a polished, beautiful essay like Garth Greenwell puts out, or some of these others. George Saunders likes to teach, so he uses his Substack to teach, and that's a very, it's like paying your tutor. That's an educational expense, if you ask me, to subscribe to that Substack. Um, I But for somebody who's writing their first novel, you think you have to have a platform to, I guess, show an agent. Is that what, to show an agent, that you exist in the interwebs? Unless it's something that is what you're selling, what difference would it make? Um, if people know you for writing about crocheting, and then you have a novel, those people are not necessarily going to come across to buy your novel, unless it's about crocheting. um, I saw an article on the interwebs, somebody's website, which I thought was interesting, and I looked at it. It's somebody named Jane Friedman, who does publicity and marketing kind of thing for publishing, and asks about a paid Substack versus a free Substack, which I didn't even realize was a whole level of inquiry that I hadn't even begun to think about. And she is she's talking more about how Substack pushes you to do a um, sub, paid subscriptions, holding out that it can be this alternative, you know, income stream. But she's actually more pro the free one, because you're going to cut your audience so far down once, everybody will read something for free, and you can get the word out on your work. Whereas unless you're George Saunders or Garth Greenwell, once you paywall it, then you're going to lose a lot of your followers, a lot of your readers. And really, if the point is exposure, then you've just ruined your exposure by cutting your work, the people who are going to follow it down. So the question is, are you doing it for an income stream, or are you doing it as a platform that you think that a publisher or agent will recognize as gives them a little boost over to represent you? What do you think? Which way are you going, Christina, with that? Um, So Brenda said, I saw that Jane Friedman and loved her argument about not doing a paid Substack. Yeah, this woman, Jane Friedman, is fond of just newsletters. I mean, that's what I do. I have a MailChimp, and once or twice a year, I'll if you've written to me, you end up on my mailing list. Uh, uh, and so once a year or something, I might send out what's going on in writer world. Uh, and she says regular email newsletters are more helpful to develop a platform. I hate those terms, but are more helpful to develop a following likely to read your work um, than a Substack. Period. So that's interesting. Or she uses the Substack like a newsletter, which she likes that approach much better. Um, Brenda says, I'm launching a Substack with 3 other writers and a designer about how to stay creatively active. Well, that's interesting. For me, I'm always thinking about my really, really pathetic output. I mean, if anybody has been waiting for a novel from me, uh, it's because I have enough trouble sitting down and getting calm and focusing on my work, that if I also felt that I had to write these essays, to write a Substack or create some online thing, um, I would never get anything done because writing a novel is the hardest thing. So I always go to what's easier. And it's much easier. And you see your name in print, it's so much easier. Um, I, so I do this, and there's a question here. Sarah says, how, out of curiosity, how much time do you devote for preparing for Writing Wednesday, thinking about what it might take away from your writing? I do not prepare for this. Maybe if I get a question from one of you through my website, janetfitchwrites.com, if somebody is writing me a question, I might take a little time, like I did with Christina's question, and do a little research. But I don't write them. I don't prepare for them. I don't edit them once they're done, um, because I do it because I like it. It's fun. I love seeing your names. I love interacting with you. I'm a stay-at-home writer, and I enjoy the interaction. So for me, it's developing something that I enjoy doing and do it um, as a pretty discrete, contained activity that doesn't require outside prep or anything like that. Um, just like Saunders, he likes to analyze short stories. So for him to do it on a Substack is a bit of it's like performance art. Um, it's fun for him. I don't think he prepares, hugely for it. I think it's already what he's doing. So it's just allowing people to see what he does and how he thinks about stuff, and it enables him to think more deeply about things that he wants to think more deeply about anyway. So so that works for him. I Christina says, I write short stories about love that are true for me, polished and beautiful, and a lot of effort. My novel will be a fictionalized account of a love story, so it will translate. I don't paywall my work, but I have a paid option if they want to support. This is her Substack. Um, but a weekly Substack is a lot of work, I would imagine. Maybe it's not. but I imagine that for me, it would be a lot of work because I would be thinking more of like what Garth is doing, or for me, doing what George Saunders is doing would take a lot of time and focus that I would rather put into my novel. Um, um, so Christina says, yeah, the output is killing her doing a weekly. I would think doing a monthly might be enough. Um, yeah, Sarah says, glad you found a format that feeds your interest and gives us so much. I like long ago, I had a wonderful shrink who, when I was talking about doing this, or having to do something on the interwebs, it's that whole platform question. Once a book was coming out, they did want me to do more. It's like you've seen these writers on the Facebook who you never see them until they have a book out. And I find that incredibly annoying. You don't see from her, for years. And then suddenly, hi, everybody, I'm here. It's like you're not really here. You're not participating in the culture. You're just using it. It's like somebody who you haven't talked to for years, and then they call you out of the blue. Hey, it's like, what do you want? Um, the agenda is writ so large, it's really annoying. Um, uh, Brenda says, I'm doing a collective Substack with the four other people. So we're taking turns. I only have to write an essay every 5 weeks. That's very interesting. That's like a magazine. You're creating a magazine that people can go to when they're interested in your topic. That's very interesting. Let's see. How much time do I prepare? None. I clean the house. I take a shower. I get dressed. Let's see. Um, let's see. So Sparkly, who's Sparkly? I don't know who you are, but is a good question. Is there a genre that's new to you, but really want to explore one day in your writing? Oh yeah, I did an historical, Marina M. And Chimes of Lost Cathedral is historical. I did 2 contemporary novels. I could see writing sci-fi. Oh my God, we're in such sci-fi-ville. Anyway, I could see writing sci-fi. I could see writing surrealistic fiction. I could see noir. I mean, everything I do is sort of noir. And I have a noir short story that 2 short stories, and one in Los Angeles noir and one in Palm Springs noir. And actually, the noir film is coming out. Some people wanted to make a movie based on my short story, The Method, in Los Angeles noir, and that movie is coming out. People seem to like my noir, and I like noir. And I live in LA. It's a very noir place traditionally. So yeah, I could see writing in a genre. Absolutely, I think no horror, no romance. Well, there's always romance, but no romance. Genre doesn't attract me. Horror doesn't attract me. But I could see sci-fi or alt future stuff. We're in the future. Future is now. So it makes a lot of sense that everybody's writing sci-fi. Would I write more noir stories? Yeah, I sure would. It's a noir world, absolutely. Um, Brenda says, I'd like to take a workshop to work on noir stories. Well, that's an idea. That's a learn by doing kind of thing, because I've never taught noir, but it would be very interesting to work on it and to figure it out. So Sparkly You got to tell me what your name is, so I don't keep calling you Sparkly. Um, Says, I'd like to know about thoughts on self-publishing. Okay, so that kind of melds in with Substack and some of these other platforms. Um, Self-publishing. My husband has self-published, um, two books, one on comedy writing, and one was a very complex little novel that's out there. And no, he's self-published a couple more. He has a memoir about writing in the television world. He's a comedy writer, called Valuable Lessons, or How I Lost $6 Million, and wrote 120 pilots and series. Um, he is impatient. He does not want to wait around and do the agent thing and do the hunt for the publisher and all this. He's just impatient, and he just wants to get it out there and move on. So he self-publishes. And my thoughts on self-publishing is, if you are an impatient person and just want to get it out there, you're likely to be a self-publisher. Um, the difficulty with self-publishing, of course, is always distribution. How do you get it out there, especially because bookstores don't take it? If you have people who can find out about you somehow, or if you have, usually nonfiction, you have uh, other bases of people finding out about you. You're a speaker, you do other things. Fiction is different. Self-published fiction, it's mostly people who are impatient. They're too impatient to go through that editing, the agent process, and do the gatekeeper dance. Um, and they don't want to work on it anymore. Whereas, if you're starting to go through the agent process and people are interested, they want to see it, they see 50 pages, they say, I want to see the whole thing. You send the whole thing, and then they reject you. And this seems to be a pattern. The self-publisher is like, I've had enough of this, I just want it in print. Whereas somebody who is determined to do the conventionally published thing goes, there's something wrong with this book. There's some reason they're attracted to the first 50 and they want to see the rest, and there's something in the rest that is hanging me up. What is it? And they will just move heaven and earth to find out what that thing is and cure it and fix it. It's a longer process. I think self-publishing is great if you want to do a family memoir, and you want to make sure that the family can have a copy of it. I mean, that's traditionally the best, absolutely the best and oldest reason to self-publish. Often poets self-publish, or they work in consortiums. You get together, just like Brenda was talking about with her Substack. You get together with 5 other poets, and you have a consortium. You have a publishing label, an imprint that's the 5 poets imprint. And so then it's no longer a self-published, but a group published. And I think that's a more interesting model, cooperative model. I think that many people go through Amazon, who I hate beyond hate, but I understand they offer a lot of different things. But they're difficult to work with. They're that's the new world. That's where there's nobody on the phone when you have a problem. They're sending your stuff to Florida, and you're calling and saying, hey, what the hell's going on? And there's no one there, so, uh, you know, caveat emptor. I mean, they a lot of people publish through them, but you're dealing with a faceless entity that doesn't give a damn, basically. Um, so let's talk about these Substacks, Medium, these different, I don't know if they still have WordPress. Um, I think that if I was starting out, I would be so damn sick of not getting published, not getting and just being rejected all over the place, that I probably would do it just as an outlet to frustration. And, there's nothing wrong with that. Just always watch whether things are using the same juice um, as your fiction, and that the publishers are not gonna be impressed unless you're writing about cooking and your book is a cooking book. And then how is your book different from your Substack? You can't just write about cooking and then collect the essays from Substack and ask a major publisher to publish that. Um, I watched a video of somebody has a Substack that I'm actually paying for. It's a publisher insider named Lee. I think it's Lee Stein. Um, and she has industry professionals come and do live chats. And I signed up for it because an editor that a friend had a manuscript at was speaking. And I just thought, oh, I'd go spy on him for my friend and report back. And I've seen a couple things now that were pretty interesting about the publishing world. This one was an agent, and somebody was addressing this question about Substack, and she was saying that it's you can't just gather your output on Substack and go to a publisher and say, "Oh, see, I have this great Substack, and we'll take these and compress them and make a book." It's the writer has to think about what does the limitation of Substack, which are, their essay length pieces, what can't you do on Substack that is related to your chosen field, but you never had really elbow room to do what you really wanted to do? How are you going to move forward? Uh, so I thought that was very interesting. But for fiction, even teaching fiction doesn't have much carryover into selling books unless you've already been reading that person. I mean, we follow Garth Greenwell or we follow George Sanders because of what they've written. And then we're very interested in their Substack because we know this is a very knowledgeable person and we can learn a lot about writing from their work. But does it reinforce them as a writer, as a fiction writer? Maybe it helps them explore their art, but art is, I don't know. See, I kind of differentiate between being intellectual and being an artist. I mean, I come out of, like many of you, we went to college. I had ideas that I was going to become a historian, an academic. And I do have a side of myself that really enjoys analysis. And that's the side I use in teaching, is the ability to analyze something. Um, but it's a different head than art. the art head is, it's allowing a certain randomness. It's going for I it's not so much about ideas as it is about, um, kind of this really interesting brew or conversation between, content and content and form. Art is it's it's this kind of messy sub rosa weird alchemy between the form and content, bruise, bruise, bruise. And then if I was going to do a Substack that somehow, or other platform that somehow spoke to or allowed me an outlet to explore that kind of kind of weird brew, I would find it more helpful to feed my art. Whereas to write intellectual essays develops my critical side, but it doesn't really warm those artistic fires, which is what I'm always really looking to do. So if you were going to do a Substack, and weekly is pretty demanding, it's like teaching a class once a week, that kind of prep. Um, think about how you can make it feed your work, your fiction. Um, Christina says the inverse doesn't work. Serializing a novel doesn't translate well on Substack. Yeah, but it might be a place where you can play with form in a way that you don't necessarily want to commit. It's more like short stories. You don't want to commit to an interesting form, um, in your novel, because the novel already has a tone and a form and a, you know, central project. But maybe I'd want to try a form like, I'm going to just get up a second. There's a book I want to grab off the shelf here, and you'll see why. Okay, so these are some of my very favorite books, but I don't write in this style at all. Okay, this is Markson, Vanishing Point. Markson writes in sentences. So that is not like a narrative flow here. These are discrete sentences that reverberate with one another, and more like a poem, like lines of a poem. This is about Vanishing Point. It's about writers. It's always about writing. So this is like, there's a line. Okay, I'll read this page and you'll see what I'm talking about. William Byrd, John Dowland, Thomas Campion. What? The suggestion that most editors are failed writers, to which Eliot, so are most writers. Skip down. The first time Ossip Mandelstam was arrested by Soviet authorities, Stalin himself phoned Pasternak to indicate that Mandelstam would be released. Pasternak then asked if he and Stalin might meet for a chat. A chat about what? Why? About life, about love, about death. Stalin had already hung up. Skip down. There are more than 530 miles of bookshelves in the Library of Congress. Skip down. Most of Homer is trash, determined Walter Savage Landor, who felt the same way about Dante. Skip down. 2,000 years before Shakespeare, Aeschylus apparently acted in his own plays also, and may have directed them as well. I mean, that's a novel. These are the way each line or couple of lines, the way they set up a conversation in your mind, um, is the form of the novel. So it's like novel as a salad almost. And Markson, almost, most writers will tell you about Markson. He's like a centerpiece in literature of our times. So if you ever get a chance to pull him off. And then there's Ava by Carol Mazo. And Ava does the similar thing where there's individual sentences like this that reverb off of each other. And it's a little bit more humanistic, a little bit more narrative, rather than fact, 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 fact. And then it's like, oh my God, look how they shimmer together. This is a story told that way. And it's very, very beautiful. I can't recommend Carol Mazo or Ava enough. It is so beautiful. So if I was to write a Substack, I was curious to try this form, I might write a Substack in this form and just to play with it. And it would, to blow people's minds. And then, people would maybe subscribe just to see what the hell I was going to do next with it. Or, a very small Substack, like just there's a writer named Andrew Dugas, Dugas, up in San Francisco, that I met at the Community of Writers. And he doesn't do it anymore, but he used to do a daily haiku and post it on Facebook, beautifully written with this little chop. And, that's an interesting journal. I think that when we say Substack, we're implying a certain kind of performance that is not necessary. It's not necessary to write an essay. It's not necessary to blog about, my life in France or, my crocheting or whatever. Thematically, it could be very interesting. So I think that to do something you wouldn't do in your novel, but that helps you sparkle, that, it's like it adds something to your life rather than, just having, oh my God, I've got a weekly Substack, and the first week I do recipes, the second, I do an essay, third, I do this, fourth, I do this, and then having to drag yourself through that cycle. It's like, I'd rather just get a job than have to do that. But if, most people can't really get that many people. I mean, think about it. At say $5 a head, per month, you have 10 people who subscribe, that's $50. You know, how hard do you want to work for that $50? I think I'd rather just get a job or do something that I would do anyway. That would be fun. I would do It's So Hard writes. I only really write poetry, and I wonder if you have any suggestions on how I could go about a Substack for that, as well as if I should just try to branch out rather than sticking to poetry alone. If you are a poet, the the noblest of professions, the noblest of professions, I would, you know, all all venues are open to you. Nothing is going to be tremendously lucrative. The poet I know who actually, I know a poet who makes a living because he has a poetry publishing house, Right Bloody, Derek Brown. And he manages to support himself. But man, that guy travels and he does shows. He organizes shows. like a traveling medicine circus almost, and publishes like 50 poetry books. He manages it. As far as just placing your stuff, that's there's so many journals that will take your poetry, and you're not going to be expecting to make a lot of money, but it's uh, the most wonderful journals all over the country. And poetry is a tighter community. People are really far more supportive of one another than the fiction community. If I'm reading a short story at a bookstore, people might come. If I'm like just, but poets will show up for one another. They will buy each other's books. They will talk them up. They just, it's I don't know how many, is there a poetry a poetry, I don't know, even Substack, if it's divided into like rooms, if there's a poetry section or a poetry city within Substack. Um, I would look into that, because if there is, there's a whole group of people who are sharing their stuff back and forth. Um, I think that branching out rather than sticking to poetry alone is just what attracts you. If you're attracted to trying out fiction, definitely try it out. Poets make wonderful fiction writers because they're very observant and they hear beautifully. This agent that I was sneaking a peek at online um, was asked about poets. Does she represent poets? And she says, yeah, she does. Often poets who have written a novel uh, get special attention from her because they already care about the language, they already hear, and they're very observant. So uh, I can't say whether you should or shouldn't, but I'm sure whichever way you go with that is good. Um, so look around on Substack and see if any of your favorite poets have a Substack, and whether they're publishing poetry or whether they are teaching. How are they, or talking about the crocheting? How are they using it? Sarah says a Substack for the the sentence type of fiction. That would be fun. So Christina says there is no separate category for poetry on Substack. But I bet there are people who are doing it. But with fiction writers, it takes so long. Unlike poetry, it takes such focus to write a 300, 400, 500-page novel, years and years and years. And so you develop a hunger for seeing your name in print. And I've got to say that's one of the positives of Substack, is you can just get something published. Um, I do a lot of reviews on Goodreads, even though that too is Amazon. They just buy everything in sight. But I like to go over what I've read in my mind and describe it, and gives me a chance to think again about it. And I think to use a Substack for memoir, that's where people seem to be the strongest, is talking about themselves and their experience, our year in Provence or whatever. And it gives them a chance to think more deeply about their experience if they are using it in a way that I find interesting. It's like, what about it? What about your clams? Or it's like, I don't care what you ate. I care what things made you think of. And that Karen Carbo Substack is really good for that. I like that. Um, but I'd be careful about putting a lot of weight on uh, visibility, like becoming visible through Substack. Um, I don't know that people really use each other's Substack. Um, I think that, like, it's trying to be another social media thing rather than a blog, but it really is a blog. So, how tight that community might be, how supportive of each other are they? Does Rebecca Mackay read everybody else's Substack, or does she just put hers on there? I wonder. Uh, do you read everybody's stuff, or do you tend to stick to George Saunders and Garth Greenwell, and Rebecca Mackay and whoever else is on there? Mm, just make sure you're putting the bulk of your energy into whatever it is your main goal is, and judge your own distractibility, your own um, ability to focus and your own energy level, and if you're kind of low energy like me and a super focuser, um, it's it's dangerous for me to do that kind of outside work because the novel stops if I'm writing an essay, even if I'm writing a book, like a long book review for the LA Review of Books, something like that. If it takes me 2 weeks to write it, those are 2 weeks I am not working on my book. Um, and you know, it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. Isn't that what they say? All right. Well, thank you for coming for Writing Wednesday. I appreciate it. Definitely subscribe if you enjoyed this kind of thing, and take a look around at the archive. I've got 175 little talks like this on YouTube. And hope to see you next week. And please write to me if you have questions. I love to thank you so much, Cece, for sending me a question that I could sink my teeth into. So thank you. And I hope this was useful, and wish you good writing. Thank you. Bye.